What if the person who threw you away like yesterday's news was forced to watch you inherit the world? Imagine being so thoroughly erased from your ex-husband's life that he looks right through you in public. Now picture his face at his own glittering charity gala when it's announced that you, the woman he deemed worthless, are the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of Isabel Rossi, a forgotten wife who was about to remind everyone, especially the man who broke her, that the most powerful legacies are built from the ashes of betrayal. Isabel Rossi had mastered the art of becoming invisible. It wasn't a skill she'd sought, but one she'd acquired over the last 2 years, like a layer of dust settling on a forgotten portrait. Her life had shrunk to the size of her small, sunlit apartment in Soho, a world away from the cavernous Upper East Side penthouse she once called home. Her days were measured in the quiet clicks of her camera shutter and the bittersweet aroma of darkroom chemicals. Photography was her only rebellion, the act of capturing the world's beauty, a silent protest against the ugliness of her own erasure. Today, the city's biting November wind was a fitting companion to the chill in her heart. She was delivering a set of prints to a gallery in Chelsea, a small victory that felt monumental. As she clutched the portfolio to her chest, she saw him, Nathaniel Sterling, her ex-husband. He was stepping out of a black town car, his charcoal grey overcoat perfectly tailored, his silver-streaked hair styled with the same meticulous precision he applied to his business dealings. And on his arm was Chloe Lancaster, a woman whose entire existence seemed curated for Instagram, all sharp angles, bright smiles, and effortless glamour. They were laughing, a sound that felt like shards of glass in Isabel's ears. For a wild, stupid moment, her feet froze. A ghost of a memory surfaced. Nate, years ago, telling her she was the only real thing in his life of polished facades. The memory dissolved as quickly as it came. They walked towards her, Chloe's stiletto heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the pavement. Isabel's heart hammered against her ribs. Just keep walking. Don't look. Be invisible. But it was too late. Nate's gaze swept over her, a brief, dismissive flicker. There was no recognition. Not a glimmer. It wasn't the polite aversion of an ex-lover avoiding an awkward encounter. It was the blank, unseeing stare one gives a stranger, a piece of the city's scenery. He had looked right through her. Chloe, however, paused. Her perfectly arched brow lifted in a slow, deliberate assessment of Isabel's worn jeans, her comfortable boots, her simple wool coat. A faint, pitying smirk touched her lips before Nate pulled her along. The portfolio in Isabel's arms suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The cold wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in her bones, a deep cellular freeze. He hadn't just moved on. He had expunged her from his history. The 8 years of their marriage, her sacrifices, her support as he built his financial empire, her quiet belief in him, had been deleted from his memory. Shaking, she forced herself to move, turning the corner and leaning against the cold brick of a building, her breath coming in ragged puffs. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over her, followed by a profound, aching loneliness. Later that evening, the city lights outside her window did little to dispel the gloom. She was developing photos in her makeshift darkroom when the intercom buzzed, startling her. It was the building's doorman. "Ms. Rossi, there's a courier here for you. Needs a signature." Puzzled, she went downstairs. The courier handed her a crisp, heavy-stock envelope. The return address was a prestigious law firm, Davies, Finch and Gable. Her stomach twisted. Law firms only meant trouble. Had Nate found some new way to torment her, a forgotten debt? Back in her apartment, she slit the envelope open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of watermarked paper. The letter was brief and formal. It requested her presence at their offices the following Monday at 10 a.m. for the reading of the last will and testament of their client, Mr. Arthur Pendleton. Isabel read the name again. Arthur Pendleton. It took her a moment to place him. Not the billionaire industrialist of the same name who was notoriously reclusive, but Art, the quiet, elderly man who came into the cafe where she had worked part-time for the first 6 months after her divorce. He always sat at the corner table with a black coffee and a newspaper, his eyes kind but weary. They'd struck up a gentle friendship, talking about classic films and the changing seasons. She'd told him about her photography, and he'd listened with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in years. He'd stopped coming in a few months ago. She'd assumed he'd moved or fallen ill. Tears pricked her eyes, this time not of humiliation, but of a soft, genuine sadness for the loss of a friend. But his will? Why would she be summoned? He'd mentioned having no family. Perhaps he'd left her a book from his collection, a small, sentimental gesture. It had to be. With a sigh, she placed the letter on her counter, the mystery a small, curious flicker in the vast darkness of her loneliness. The offices of Davies, Finch and Gable were a testament to old money and silent power. Mahogany walls, leather-bound books that looked as if they hadn't been opened in a century, and a view of Central Park that was probably worth more than Isabel's entire building. She felt small and out of place in her simple black dress, the only decent one she owned. She was led into a conference room where an elderly man with a kind, serious face rose to greet her. "Ms. Rossi, I'm William Davies. Thank you for coming." "Of course," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I was so sorry to hear about Art, Mr. Pendleton. He was a lovely man." Mr. Davies gestured to a chair. "He was indeed. He spoke very highly of you." Isabel sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was the only one there. "I'm a little confused as to why I'm here, Mr. Davies." The lawyer gave her a gentle, knowing look. He sat opposite her, the polished table reflecting their images like a dark, still lake. He slid a thick, bound document to the center of the table. "Isabel." "May I call you Isabel?" Arthur was very specific in his instructions. He was a man who valued genuine connection above all else. He felt the world had become transactional, a series of calculated exchanges. "He told me that in you he found something he thought had vanished from the world, simple, unadulterated kindness." Isabel blushed, unsure how to respond. "We just talked. He was easy to talk to." "You saw a lonely old man and offered him your time and your ear, with no expectation of reward," Davies continued, his voice soft. "You never asked who he was, what he did, or what he was worth. You just saw him. For that reason, he has named you in his will." He cleared his throat and opened the document. "I'll dispense with the legal formalities and get to the pertinent clause. To Isabel Rossi, who showed an old man that a human heart could still be a place of quiet sanctuary, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, assets, stocks, and controlling interest in Pendleton Global Enterprises." The words hung in the silent, air-conditioned room. Isabel stared at him, a polite, confused smile on her face. She was sure she had misheard. "I'm sorry. The what?" "The entirety of his estate, Isabel." "No, you don't understand. The Arthur Pendleton I knew was just Art. A retired history professor," he said. "He lived in a small apartment uptown." Mr. Davies's expression was full of sympathy. He did maintain a small, modest apartment for his own peace of mind, but he was also the Arthur Pendleton, founder and CEO of Pendleton Global Enterprises. Isabel's mind went blank. The room seemed to tilt, the view of the park swaying precariously. She gripped the arms of her chair. That's not possible. That man he's a billionaire." "Was," Davies corrected gently. "His estate, after a preliminary valuation, is estimated to be worth approximately $18 billion. $18 billion. The number was an absurdity. It was a concept, not a reality. Isabel felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat, but it came out as a choked sob. "Why? Why me? It doesn't make any sense." "He left a letter for you," Davies said, sliding a sealed cream-colored envelope across the table. "He explains it better than I ever could." Isabel took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in Art's familiar, slightly shaky cursive. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Not yet. Her entire reality had been fractured in the space of a minute. The floor beneath her felt like sand. "We will handle everything," Mr. Davies assured her. "The transition, the press, the board. We have a team ready. Arthur anticipated this would be a shock. Our primary goal is to protect you." The rest of the meeting was a blur. Davies spoke of trusts and holding companies, of board seats and philanthropic foundations. Isabel nodded, but the words were just sounds. She thought of Nate, of his dismissive glance. She thought of the condescending smirk on Chloe's face. She thought of her tiny apartment and the struggle to pay rent, the quiet desperation that had been her constant companion. $18 billion. It wasn't a reward. It felt like a weapon. A terrifying, impossibly heavy weapon had just been placed in her hands, and she had no idea how to wield it. As she left the building and stepped back onto the bustling New York street, the city looked different. The people, the cars, the towering skyscrapers, they all seemed part of a world she no longer belonged to. She was a ghost who had just inherited an empire, and the weight of it threatened to crush her. The invitation arrived 2 days later, delivered by messenger. Thick embossed cardstock announcing the Sterling Foundation annual gala. It was Nate's crown jewel, a night where the city's elite gathered to write checks and have their egos stroked. An invitation was sent to the estate of Arthur Pendleton, a courtesy to a deceased business titan. Mr. Davies had it forwarded to her. "You don't have to go," he'd said over the phone, his voice laced with concern. But Isabel knew she did. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about reclamation. For 2 years, she had allowed herself to be a ghost. Nate had looked through her because she had let herself become transparent. Tonight, she would become solid again. The transformation took an army. A team, curated by Davies, descended on her apartment. A stylist, a hairdresser, a makeup artist. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones. Isabel felt like a statue being prepared for an exhibition. She chose a dress of deep sapphire silk that fell like water. It was simple, elegant, and utterly commanding. A necklace of sapphires and diamonds from Arthur's vault rested against her collarbone, cold and heavy as a suit of armor. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. The haunted, tired look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a focused, steely calm. This wasn't Isabel Rossi, the forgotten wife. This was the heiress to the Pendleton Empire. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the grand temple-like hall of Dender. The air hummed with power, wealth, and feigned sincerity. As Isabel stepped out of the town car, a few cameras flashed, their operators likely wondering who this unknown, striking woman was. She walked up the grand staircase alone, her head held high. She saw Nate near the entrance, holding court, Chloe clinging to his arm like a designer accessory. He was in his element, a king in his kingdom. Isabel's heart gave a painful lurch, but she steadied herself. She was not here for him. She was here for herself. She took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a quiet alcove, watching the proceedings. People glanced at her, their curiosity piqued by her unfamiliar face and the breathtaking jewels. She ignored them. She was waiting. After an hour of mingling, the lights dimmed. Nate took the stage, a confident, charming smile plastered on his face. He spoke eloquently about charity, about legacy, about building a better future. Isabel had to admit he was good at this. He could sell sincerity to a cynic. "Legacy isn't just about what we build," he declared, his voice resonating through the vast hall. "It's about who carries it forward. It's about ensuring that our work, our values, continue to shape the world long after we are gone." As he finished to a round of enthusiastic applause, he remained on the stage. "And now we have a special, if somber, announcement. As many of you know, our city recently lost a true giant of industry, a man whose legacy is immeasurable, Mr. Arthur Pendleton." A respectful murmur went through the crowd. Nate continued. His longtime legal counsel, Mr. William Davies, is here to say a few words about the future of the Pendleton Foundation, which has been a great friend to our own. Isabel's breath caught. It was happening. Mr. Davies, looking distinguished and calm, walked to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. Thank you, Nathaniel. Arthur Pendleton was a man of great vision and even greater privacy. His final wishes were a reflection of his unique character. While the Pendleton Foundation will indeed continue its work with a new endowment, his primary legacy, his entire personal and corporate estate, is to be entrusted to a single individual. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Names were whispered, a rumored secret son, a long-lost relative. Davies let the suspense build for a moment before continuing. Arthur believed that character was forged not in boardrooms, but in the quiet moments of compassion. He sought a successor who possessed not a lust for power, but a capacity for grace. He has bequeathed the entirety of his fortune and controlling interest in Pendleton Global Enterprises to someone he believed embodied that spirit. He paused, and his eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on Isabel's alcove. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. That individual is with us tonight. Please join me in acknowledging the sole heiress to the Pendleton estate, Ms. Isabel Rossi. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Every head turned, searching. On stage, Nate's charming smile froze, then crumbled. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. He stared at Davies, his eyes wide with utter, uncomprehending disbelief. Chloe's hand, which had been resting on his arm, dropped away as she scanned the crowd with a frantic, confused expression. Slowly, gracefully, Isabel stepped out of the shadows. The sapphire dress seemed to capture and hold the light. The diamonds around her neck glittered like ice. She met Nate's gaze across the cavernous room. The shock on his face was swiftly replaced by a maelstrom of emotions. Confusion, rage, and a dawning, sickening horror. He was looking at her now, really looking at her. And in his eyes, she saw not just recognition, but the terrifying realization that the ghost he had ignored, the woman he had erased, now held the power to erase him. The invisible woman was now the most powerful person in the room. The aftermath was a tidal wave. The gala erupted into a frenzy of whispers and frantic glances. Isabel didn't stay to watch Nate's public implosion. Flanked by two discreet security men hired by Davies, she was whisked away before a single reporter could reach her, leaving a bomb of her own making to detonate in her absence. The next morning her name was everywhere, the mystery heiress, the waitress who inherited billions, the ex-wife's ultimate revenge. They painted her as a Cinderella, a gold digger, a vengeful goddess. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew about the quiet conversations over coffee with a lonely old man. Her phone, a simple device she rarely used, became a source of terror. Calls and texts flooded in from people she hadn't heard from in years. Distant relatives, old college friends, and, of course, Nate. He had called 37 times. He'd left a string of increasingly desperate voicemails. Izzy, call me. There's been a mistake. Isabel, we need to talk. This is insane. For God's sake, what is going on? How could you do this? I don't understand. That old man, from the coffee shop. Was this a game? Were you playing me the whole time? His confusion was laced with an indignation that was so quintessentially Nate. The assumption that this, too, was somehow about him. The possibility that she had a life, a connection, a destiny separate from his, was inconceivable to him. To escape the siege on her Soho apartment, Mr. Davies had her moved into Arthur's residence, the penthouse at the top of the Pendleton Tower on Park Avenue. It was less an apartment and more a palace in the sky, a triplex of glass, steel and stone with panoramic views of the city. The space was vast, silent, and overwhelmingly lonely. It was filled with priceless art, a library that spanned 2 floors, and furniture that looked too beautiful to sit on. It felt like she was trespassing. She wandered through the silent rooms, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. This was Arthur's world. The quiet, kind man in the worn tweed jacket had lived here, surrounded by a level of wealth she couldn't comprehend. It only deepened the mystery of him. On a large oak desk in his library, she finally found the letter. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "My dear Isabel, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and your world has been turned upside down. Please forgive an old man's dramatics. I imagine you have many questions, the most pressing of which is, why you? The answer is both simple and complex. The simple answer is that I liked you. You have a good heart, a quiet strength, and you see the world through an artist's eyes. You look for the beauty in the forgotten corners. When you spoke to me, you were not speaking to a billionaire. You were speaking to a person. You have no idea how rare and precious that is. The more complex answer has to do with my legacy. I built an empire, but empires can be monstrous things if left in the wrong hands. They can crush the very people they are meant to serve. I have watched men like your ex-husband, Nathaniel Sterling, my entire life. They are men who see people as leverage, relationships as transactions, and legacy as a monument to their own ego. They are hollow men. I could not, in good conscience, let my life's work be absorbed by men like him. I did not choose you to punish him, Isabel. I chose you to save my company from him, and all the men like him. I am giving you this power not as a reward, but as a responsibility. It is a heavy burden, I know. You will be tested. People will try to manipulate you, control you, and underestimate you. They will see a waitress, a scorned ex-wife. Let them. Your strength has never been in what they see, but in what you see. Be wise, be cautious, but most of all, be yourself. The world has enough tyrants. It needs more artists, more quiet observers, more kind hearts. Don't let this money change the best parts of you. Let it amplify them. Your friend, Arthur. Tears streamed down Isabel's face as she read the letter. The weight on her shoulders shifted. It was still heavy, but it was no longer the dead weight of confusing luck. It was the weight of purpose. Arthur hadn't just given her his fortune, he had given her his faith. A chime from the penthouse's internal system startled her. The building's head of security was on the video screen. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to disturb you. Mr. Sterling is in the lobby. He's demanding to see you. He's causing quite a scene." Isabel's blood ran cold. He had found her. Here, in this fortress in the sky, he was still trying to break in. The old Isabel would have hidden. She would have told the guard to send him away, and then spent the rest of the day shaking. But as she looked at Arthur's letter, something new and hard settled in her chest. She took a deep breath. "Tell Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice even and clear, "that Ms. Rossi is not available. Not now. Not ever." She cut the connection before the guard could reply. She had drawn her first boundary. It was a small act, but it felt like a declaration of war. A war for her own soul. Isabel's first day at Pendleton Global Enterprises was like stepping onto a different planet. The headquarters, occupying the top 20 floors of the tower she now lived in, was a symphony of quiet, intimidating efficiency. People in impeccably tailored suits moved with a hushed urgency, their faces grim and focused. When they saw her, they stared, their expressions a mixture of awe, suspicion, and naked curiosity. She was a glitch in their matrix, a bug in the system. Mr. Davies escorted her to the 80th floor boardroom. It was a sterile, intimidating space dominated by a gargantuan black granite table and a wall of glass overlooking the city. Seated around the table were the 12 members of the board, the titans who had, until now, run Arthur's empire. They were all men, all over 60, and they looked at her like a pack of wolves sizing up a lamb. Their leader was a man named Richard Caldwell, the COO, and Arthur's long-time number 2. He had a patrician air and eyes as cold and grey as a winter sky. "Ms. Rossi," he said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. He didn't stand. "Welcome to Pendleton Global." The The subtext was clear. Welcome to our world. You don't belong here. Isabel took the empty seat at the head of the table, Arthur's seat. The chair felt like a throne, too large and too important for her. Mr. Davies sat to her right, a silent, reassuring presence. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," Isabel said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know my appointment is unconventional." "Unconventional is one word for it," another board member muttered, a portly man with a florid face. Arthur was a genius, but in his final years, his eccentricity got the better of him. Caldwell shot him a quelling look, but the sentiment hung in the air. They thought she was a fool, a whim of a dying man. They were already planning how to manage her, how to sideline her and retain their power. Arthur was very clear in his directives, Mr. Davies interjected calmly. "Ms. Rossi holds the controlling shares. Her vote is the only one that ultimately matters. She is the final authority on all company matters." The men shifted uncomfortably. The reality of their new power dynamic was beginning to sink in. "Of course," Caldwell said, his tone shifting to one of condescending patronage. "We are all here to support Ms. Rossi and ensure a smooth transition. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little about your vision for the company." It was a trap. They expected her to have no vision, to say something naive and idealistic that they could easily dismiss. Isabel thought of Arthur's letter. "Don't let this money change the best parts of you. Let it amplify them." She met Caldwell's gaze directly. "My vision, Mr. Caldwell, is to first understand Mr. Pendleton's vision. I'm not here to tear down his life's work. I'm here to honor it. For the next few months, my plan is to listen, to learn every facet of this company. I will be meeting with every department head. I will be reviewing every major project. I will not be making any significant changes until I understand this company as well as Arthur did. Until then, I expect you all to continue your duties as you always have." Her answer surprised them. It wasn't foolish or emotional. It was measured, respectful, and logical. It gave them nothing to attack. Caldwell's expression remained impassive, but Isabel saw a flicker of something new in his eyes. Grudging respect. The meeting continued for 2 hours. They spoke a language of acronyms and financial projections that was completely foreign to her. She didn't pretend to understand. She listened, she took notes, and she asked simple, direct questions that occasionally seemed to catch them off guard. Just as the meeting was adjourning, Caldwell's assistant entered, her face pale. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. Nathaniel Sterling is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he insists on seeing Ms. Rossi." A wave of fury and dread washed over Isabel. Here. He dared to come here. Before she could respond, the boardroom doors swung open and Nate strode in, his face a mask of desperation and forced charm. "Izzy, thank God. I've been trying to reach you." The board members stared, stunned into silence. Caldwell looked at Nate with utter contempt. "Mr. Sterling, this is a private meeting," Caldwell said, his voice dangerously low. Nate ignored him, his eyes locked on Isabel. "Please, just 5 minutes. We need to clear the air. What these newspapers are saying, it's insane. We can fix this, you and I." He was trying to create a narrative, to imply a conspiracy between them in front of the board. He was trying to regain control. Isabel stood up slowly. The room was silent. All eyes were on her. She looked at the man she had once loved, the man who had shattered her heart and then pretended she didn't exist. She saw the pathetic, grasping need behind his arrogant facade. The fear was gone. In its place was a profound, icy calm. "Nate," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "the only thing that needs to be cleared is you from this room. Security." 2 large men appeared at the door instantly. Nate's face contorted in disbelief. "Izzy, don't do this!" "My name," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every person in the room heard it, "is Ms. Rossi, and you are trespassing." As security escorted a sputtering, humiliated Nate out of the room, Isabel turned back to the stunned board members. She straightened her jacket, her expression unreadable. "Now," she said as if nothing had happened. Where were we? The weeks that followed were a grueling immersion. Isabel kept her word, transforming from an heiress into a student. She arrived at the office before anyone else and left long after they were gone. She consumed reports, financial statements, and project proposals like a starving woman at a banquet. The language of business was slowly becoming less foreign, the rhythms of the corporate world more familiar. She earned a sliver of respect from the board, who saw that she was not the flighty fool they had anticipated. She was diligent, intelligent, and, most importantly, she listened. But Richard Caldwell remained an enigma. He was helpful, professional, and utterly unreadable. He treated her with a formal deference, but she always felt his cold, calculating eyes on her, waiting for her to make a mistake. Her true education came from Arthur's old files. His office, which she had not yet moved into, remained a shrine to him. One night, unable to sleep, she went in and began going through his private records. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a deeper connection to the man who had changed her life. Tucked away in a locked drawer of his desk, she found a set of old leather-bound ledgers. They weren't financial records. They seemed to be a kind of personal journal, filled with Arthur's thoughts, observations, and detailed notes on people he'd encountered over his long life. She found herself, her name first appearing about a year ago. Met a young woman at a cafe today, a photographer, sad eyes, but a kind soul, reminds me of Eleanor. Eleanor was his late wife. Reading his observations about their conversations was like reliving their friendship through his eyes. It was a comfort, a confirmation that their connection had been real. Then she stumbled upon another name, one that made her blood run cold. Sterling. It wasn't Nate. It was his father, Jonathan Sterling. The entries dated back 40 years. Arthur, then a young, ambitious entrepreneur, had partnered with Jonathan Sterling on a groundbreaking tech venture. According to Arthur's notes, it had been his innovation, his genius. But Sterling, who handled the finances, had systematically betrayed him. He'd created shell corporations, falsified reports, and pushed Arthur out, stealing the company and the patents, leaving him nearly bankrupt. Jonathan is a predator in a bespoke suit, Arthur had written. He doesn't create, he consumes. He builds his legacy on the ruins of other men's dreams. I will not be his last victim, but I swear on my life I will rebuild, and one day the name Sterling will answer for what it has done. Isabel sat back, stunned. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was a multi-generational chess game, and Arthur had just made the final, devastating move. He hadn't chosen her just because she was kind. He chose her because she was the perfect instrument of his long, simmering vengeance. She was the one person whose ascent would cause the complete and utter ruin of Jonathan Sterling's legacy, his son, Nate. The revelation was unsettling. It colored Arthur's kindness with something darker, more calculated. Had he been testing her? Was his friendship just a means to an end? She felt a pang of disillusionment, but as she read on, she saw that it was more complex. He wrote about watching Nate from afar over the years, seeing the same hollow ambition, the same transactional cruelty as his father. "The boy is his father's son," one entry read. "He married a good woman, a woman with light in her soul. He will try to extinguish it. Men like that cannot stand to see a light they did not create." He had seen it all. He had seen her marriage, her divorce, her pain. His decision was not just about revenge, it was about justice. It was about rescuing a legacy, his own, and a person, hers, from the consuming darkness of men like the Sterlings. This new knowledge armed her. It explained the hidden motives, the grand design. It also explained Richard Caldwell. In a later entry, Arthur had written about him. "Richard is loyal, brilliant, and ruthless. He does not trust easily. He sees my friendship with the girl from the cafe as a folly. He will test her. If she proves her strength, he will become her greatest ally. If she falters, he will devour her to protect the company." The game was far more dangerous than she had realized. Caldwell wasn't just waiting for her to make a mistake. He was judging whether she was worthy of Arthur's legacy. The next day, she called a meeting with Caldwell, just the two of them. She walked into his office, a sleek, minimalist space that reflected his personality. "Richard," she began, foregoing any pleasantries, "I've been reviewing some of Mr. Pendleton's personal records, including his history with Jonathan Sterling." Caldwell's mask of impassivity finally broke. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with new eyes. "I see." "He never told me," Isabel said, her voice quiet but firm. "He let me believe it was just about a simple friendship." "Why?" "Because it was," Caldwell replied, his tone softening for the first time. "The issue with the Sterlings was a ghost, a motivation from his past. But his choice of you, Ms. Rossi, was about the future. He saw your character as the antidote to their poison. He wanted your sincerity to be the bedrock of your leadership, untainted by a quest for revenge. The justice for what the Sterlings did was simply a fortunate consequence." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. Arthur's greatest fear was that his empire would become a reflection of men like Jonathan and Nathaniel Sterling, cold, rapacious, devoid of humanity. He gave it to you because he believed you would protect its soul. He turned to face her, and for the first time she felt he was truly seeing her, not as an inconvenience, but as a successor. "The question is, Ms. Rossi," he said, his voice now a low challenge, "what are you going to do with it?" The gauntlet had been thrown. The test had begun. The fall of Nathaniel Sterling was not a sudden, explosive event. It was a slow, agonizing slide. The story of the gala became a legend in New York's financial circles, a cautionary tale whispered at every bar and boardroom. Nate, once the golden boy, was now a pariah. The humiliation was a stain he couldn't wash off. Clients, spooked by his public unraveling and the perception that he was a fool, began to pull their accounts from his firm. His partners, seeing the writing on the wall, started maneuvering to buy him out. The Sterling name, once his greatest asset, was now an anchor dragging him to the bottom. Chloe Lancaster was the first rat to leave the sinking ship. Isabel saw a blurb in a gossip column. Chloe was now being seen with a European prince. The article quoted an anonymous friend who said Chloe had been deeply disturbed by Nate's instability and had ended the relationship to protect her own well-being. It was a masterclass in public relations spin. She had stripped him of his dignity and then his arm candy. Isabel watched it all from the protected fortress of Pendleton Tower. She felt a grim, distant satisfaction, but it wasn't the triumphant feeling she might have expected. It was more like watching a storm rage from a safe distance, a storm she had inadvertently created. The raw, personal pain Nate had caused her was being replaced by a kind of detached pity. She was too busy to dwell on it. Under Caldwell's surprisingly dedicated mentorship, she was learning to wield her power. She discovered she had a natural instinct for it, an ability to cut through the noise and see the human element in every business decision. She launched a new initiative for the Pendleton Foundation, a massive grant program to support emerging artists and photographers, a nod to the dream she had once been forced to abandon. The move was lauded in the press. She was no longer the waitress heiress. She was the patron of the arts, a visionary carrying on Arthur's philanthropic spirit. About 3 months after the gala, her assistant informed her that Nate was in the lobby. Again. This time, he hadn't come demanding to see her. He had simply said he would wait. All day he sat in the public lobby of the Pendleton Tower, a ghost in a place of power. The security guards kept a wary eye on him, but he made no trouble. He just sat, staring at nothing, a man who had lost his kingdom, now sitting on a designer bench that felt like a cardboard throne. As Isabel was leaving for the day, she passed through the lobby. She could have taken a private elevator, but she chose not to. She needed to close this chapter. He looked up as she approached. The change in him was shocking. The arrogant gleam in his eye was gone. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was gaunt, and he looked broken. "Izzy," he said, his voice a hoarse croak. He stood up but seemed unsteady on his feet. "Hello, Nate," she said. Her voice was not cold, not angry. It was just calm. I just wanted to talk," he stammered. "Not about the money, not about any of that. I wanted to say, I'm sorry." The apology, when it finally came, felt hollow, anticlimactic. It was a word spoken too late, after the wound had already scarred over. "I know," she said simply. His face crumpled. "You don't understand. I lost everything. My firm, my reputation. Chloe, it's all gone." "You didn't lose it, Nate," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It was taken. No, that's not right either. It was never really yours to begin with. Your firm was built on your father's reputation. Your reputation was built on an image you projected. And Chloe was with the image, not with you. It was all a house of cards. Arthur's will wasn't a storm. It was just a gust of wind." He stared at her, the raw, unvarnished truth hitting him harder than any insult ever could. "What am I supposed to do now?" he whispered, his voice cracking. It was the first honest question he had ever asked her. Isabel looked at the man before her, no longer a monster from her past, but a deeply flawed, pathetic human being. The anger she had held for so long finally, completely dissolved. There was nothing left to hate. Her redemption, she realized in that moment, had nothing to do with his destruction. It had to do with her own construction. "I don't know, Nate," she said, and her voice was filled with a surprising sincerity. "For the first time in your life, you get to decide what you're made of, without your father's name or your money to hide behind. You have to build something real. That's all any of us can do." She turned and walked away, not looking back. She left him standing in the cavernous lobby, a solitary figure dwarfed by the empire she now commanded. There was no triumph in her steps, only the quiet, steady rhythm of a woman finally, truly, walking into her own life. 6 months later, spring had arrived in New York, painting the city in soft shades of green and gold. The air was filled with a sense of renewal that echoed in Isabel's own heart. The name Isabel Rossi no longer belonged to the gossip columns. It belonged to the business pages and the art journals. She had found her rhythm. She was not the ruthless tycoon the board might have initially feared, nor the naive artist they had first assumed. She was something new, a leader who led with empathy, a businesswoman with an artist's soul. She had kept her promise to Arthur. She hadn't let the money change her. She'd let it amplify the best parts of herself. Pendleton Global was thriving under her quiet, steady hand, moving into sustainable technologies and ethical investments, ventures Arthur had dreamed of but never had the time to implement. Tonight was the opening of the Emergence exhibition at a gallery in Soho. It was the first exhibition funded entirely by her new foundation grant, showcasing the work of 10 unknown photographers. It was held in the very same gallery where she had been heading that fateful day she'd run into Nate. She walked through the crowded room, no longer invisible. People greeted her with respect. Artists, critics, collectors. They didn't see an ex-wife or an heiress. They saw the woman who had given them a chance. Richard Caldwell was there, standing by the wine bar, looking uncharacteristically relaxed. He raised his glass to her in a silent toast of approval. He had become her most trusted advisor and, surprisingly, her friend. Isabel stopped in front of a series of black and white photos, capturing forgotten, overlooked corners of the city. A single flower growing through a crack in the pavement, the reflection of a skyscraper in a puddle, the weary hands of an old woman resting on a subway railing. They were beautiful, poignant, and full of a quiet, resilient hope. They were her photographs. Under a pseudonym, she had submitted her own work to the jury. They had chosen it on its own merit. Seeing her work on the wall, appreciated by strangers, was a feeling more profound and satisfying than signing any billion-dollar deal. A young woman came to stand beside her. "These are incredible," the woman said. "They make you see the things you walk past every day." "Thank you," Isabel said, a genuine smile lighting up her face. That's what the artist was hoping for. She looked around the room, at the vibrant art, at the hopeful faces of the young photographers, at the city lights twinkling through the gallery window. Her life, once small and silent, was now filled with purpose and color. The ghosts of her past were finally gone. Nate, his father, their legacy of hollowness. They were nothing more than faded photographs from a life she no longer lived. Arthur had given her a key to an empire, but what he had really given her was the key to her own life. She was no longer the subject in someone else's portrait. She was the curator, the artist, the visionary. And this was only the beginning. Isabel Rossi had finally emerged, and she was ready to frame her own future. Isabel's journey shows us that true power isn't about the money you have, but the person you become when everything is stripped away. She went from being an invisible woman, ignored by the man who should have valued her most, to a titan of industry who reshaped a legacy on her own terms. Her redemption wasn't in her ex-husband's downfall, but in her own rise. A rise built on kindness, resilience, and the courage to finally be seen. What did you think of Isabel's story? Do you believe in karmic justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her incredible transformation, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a story of strength and redemption, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories that will stay with you long after you've finished watching.